means another edition of I Didn't Know That. Hi, I'm Karaoke Bob. I'll be joined by our co-host Mike Stoffer here in just a moment. Tonight, a jam-packed episode full of things that matter. Tonight we have Jack Butler from SagePoint Financial. He'll be talking about the GameStop saga. More current events with Dr. Jarrod Tudor and Dr. Jarrod Gray. Not Dr. Jarrod Gray. He's the professor. Oh, there's graphics that are flipping around it. These are great, Mike. Anyway. So sit back. Get yourself a beverage, preferably a nice glass of wine or something. Tonight I have bubbly. And relax, because we're going to get to the show right now. Please welcome Mike Stoffer. That's wonderful.
Hey, Bob. How are you?
There he is. Fantastic. How are you?
I am well. It's always good to see you. I look forward to every Tuesday night. Yes, it's good to be seen. It's better than not being seen. And, Bob, there's one other graphic that I'm going to throw up here in homage of today.
Oh, that's fantastic. I tried to watch it last night, but we didn't. We got distracted. And so I'll either watch it tonight or tomorrow night.
You look very good there, by the way.
That's awesome. Yeah. I always wondered what I would look like with Bill Murray's hair. Now I know.
Now you know. Now you know. And, you know, the person that does these graphics for us is Mr. Mark Seibert.
That's good. Who's been stabbed in the head by Evil Bert.
And what I love about Mark is, you know, I go out and I buy him new equipment for the show.
Right.
You know, microphone, headphones, and he decides he's going to take time off. Which, Bob, to how you manage me, I've learned never be nice to anybody.
Sounds unethical.
And that's how you are with me. Never nice to me. In that way that, yes. We got some people clocking in here. Josh Ondo is
good morning, Josh.
On here.
Lori Evans is here.
Lori Evans. Hey, all. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. I don't know if Big Dave's going to show up. He's doing some traveling. I don't know when he's going to be back. But anyways, thank you, everybody, for coming and joining us this evening. We look forward to having a fun evening. And, well, at least we have one Seibert showing up. Melissa, Mark's mother. And here we go. Bob is always sweet. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that is.
Wait a minute. We're going to get her off here. Yeah,
that's Jack's biggest fan.
Is anybody on my side? Yes. Thank you.
No,
yes,
no,
good.
And with good reason.
I have no fan base. We get people come on here one time. Jack hasn't even said anything. He's already got fans showing up. Do I have any fans?
That's right.
No. You know, Deirdre. Big Dave. Big Dave is back and here.
And I'd say Deirdre is probably your fan.
No, Deirdre, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you have fans. Yeah. Because we bring good information each and every week, stuff that people don't know that they want to know or didn't know that they want to know, and they come here for it, and you give it to them. So I think while the fan base seems segmented to all these other individuals, I think everybody is a fan of Mike Stoffer.
Yeah, there we go. We have a newbie on the show here, Dominic Farolino, a newbie. So
excellent, Dominic. Nice to have you here.
And Mary Jo is on my side. We're on your side, Mike. That's good to know.
Melissa Seibert, Mary Jo is on your side.
Yeah.
See, do you feel better now?
So I thanks everybody. I am feeling a lot better. But you know, talking about feeling better, Bob. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are not happy today because Puxtatani. How do you say it?
Puxtatani Phil.
You saw his. No, is it you see the shadow or
if
don't?
If he sees
which one
his
is
shadow,
it?
He's afraid of it and goes back into his little cave for another 6 weeks. If he doesn't see his shadow, then he stays out, and that means there's not 6 more weeks of winter or something like that.
How long did these rodents live? Because he's been around for a long time. This he knows this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea. One of my favorite scenes from Groundhog Day is when Puxatawney Phil's driving the old Chevy pickup with Phil.
Yeah,
it's pretty great.
I don't think I've ever seen that movie.
Oh, I try and watch it every year. It's really a classic. Okay. It's really a great one.
I believe you. And Yelena, Bonanno says hello too, Bob.
You'll never hear I Got You, Babe the same way ever again.
Oh. Wow.
It's true.
Sonny and Cher, huh?
That's right. Speaking of music, you noticed there was a new theme song.
I love that theme song.
At the top of the song. Well, our first guest wrote that riff.
Oh.
So that's why that made an appearance there.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Very
That's right.
Cool.
Let's welcome to the show from SagePoint Financial, my good friend, Jack Butler. And the reason I wanted to have Jack on the show is this GameStop thing blew up, and it's all over every feed I looked at. Every news article was about this, and I really didn't understand what was happening. And so I started to do some digging and did some more reading, and I frankly still didn't have any clue as to really what was happening. And Jack's a pretty sharp guy when it comes to that stuff, so I knew that Jack would be the one that could kind of give us a little bit of an education as far as, what short selling is, how you squeeze a short sell, and why GameStop was so ripe for that tactic, and kind of, what it means, like what we were talking about before we went live, which was the democratization of the finance industry. Isn't that what you said, Jack?
Yeah, well, that's the term that has been used. Yep.
Is that really kind of what's happening here, or first, what is a short sell for people who don't understand what that term means?
Well, first, what I would say is thank you for the theme song. That was great nostalgia. It also reminds me why people tell me not to quit my day job. But a short sale. So
that's a great riff, though, Jack.
It's phenomenal.
It is stone cold.
I love it.
We did this. We were babies when we did this. Actually, I retconned the guitars like when COVID started. I sent this to Jack. I was like, look, I wiped my guitars and put new ones on. He's like, can I come over and wipe my bass part and put a new bass part on too?
Who's that on drums, Bob? Anybody we know?
That'd be my good buddy Jeff Borkert, who is a doctor of psychology in PhD in at the University of South Carolina, Charleston.
Well, have him talk to Matt Fuller, if you would, please.
Right. Yeah. Oh, Matt apologizes, sends his regards, fell asleep. Whatever. Okay, let's get back to Jack. Okay.
All right. So it's actually a really great story, and it's remaining this week pretty prominent in the news. So it's not old news. It's really current. So what I wanted to do was just take a couple of minutes, not to bore you, but I think there's a little bit of mechanical knowledge that will help the story make a lot more sense if we could just spend a couple minutes on that. So when somebody buys a stock, the traditional way to do that, and evidenced by the fact that this is how most stocks are purchased, is what they call taking a long position. And I think the best way to think about that is that you're buying a stock for the long term. So what happens is, let's say you wanted to buy $10,000 of XYZ, you actually put $10,000 into the account, you get $10,000 of shares of XYZ, and you do that with the anticipation that it's going to appreciate over time and that your value will increase. So you're in it long, you're in it for the long term. There's another way to buy a stock, or actually you sell it, in that when you take a short position, what you're doing there is you don't actually own the stock. You're technically borrowing it from someone who does, then you're selling it. And what you're hoping is that stock is going to depreciate in value, at least in the short term. And you're hoping, now when you borrow stock, here's the thing that's really confusing for people. It has nothing to do with the monetary value of the stock at that time. So think about it, Bob, if I came to you to borrow a cup of sugar, what do I owe you? I owe you
a cup of sugar. Right.
Right. Doesn't matter what the cost of sugar is at the time I borrowed it or at the time I give it back. I owe you a cup of sugar. So with a short sale, you're borrowing shares from the firm and you're selling them. What you owe them back at some point in the future are those shares. So if I borrow 100 shares of XYZ, I get to sell it today. And what I owe you in the future is simply 100 shares of XYZ. So what I'm hoping is that I could borrow them from you when they're worth $10, sell them, be able to buy them back at a price lower than that, let's say $3, give you the shares back and keep the difference. The issue with that is when you buy a stock, going back to the first scenario, if I put $10,000 into XYZ long, the most I can lose on that transaction is my total investment, $10,000. When you go short, you're hoping that the stock's going to go down, and probably relatively quickly. But because there's technically no limit to how high a stock can appreciate, we've seen this with Amazon, 3,000 a share, Tesla, all these splits. So your risk of loss when you're short is technically unlimited. So you're hoping to see that stock go down, and then you go out and buy the shares, and that's what they call covering or closing the position, and you give them back. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand. Now, why would you want to do that? And why would somebody want to just give away shares for somebody else to sell? What's in it for them if they kind of understand that the reason why people want to sell them now is that they're expecting the price to go down?
Well, so you're not technically borrowing from another individual. You're borrowing from the firm. And so the firm has so many shares that are being held long. They have so many short positions, and they're the ones loaning them out. And there's costs associated with that, and they charge interest on that as well. So they're really giving you someone else's stock through a process called hypothetication. But the individual isn't really giving you the stock. The firm is extending it to you on credit. And the issue, what makes the whole proposition seem kind of crazy, is that your loss in that situation could be unlimited. So to address that, the Federal Reserve has regulations in place. One of them is Regulation T, that says when you're borrowing to purchase a security as a retail consumer, on your initial position, you can't borrow more than 50%. So you have to have at least 50% equity in the account. So if you were to borrow and sell $10,000, you have to have at least $5,000 on deposit. And then they also give you maintenance requirements saying now that stock price can go up and down. So they're going to make sure that it doesn't really run away from you. And there's something called a maintenance or margin call, where if you were to drop below 25% equity, you have two choices. You can either deposit more cash to bring your equity up, or that firm has the right to sell anything else you have in your portfolio. So it could be your favorite stock. It could be the one you inherited from your grandmother, whatever. If you don't put more cash in, they can sell that to raise the necessary cash to make sure that it doesn't really run that far out of whack.
Go ahead, Mike.
And this is not free either. There's basically borrowing expenses to this as well.
Correct. There's interest running in the background, and that's how the firm's making money. They're basically loaning you something they already have on deposit from someone else. They're getting transaction costs for doing that, and they're charging you interest the whole time that it's running based on that market value. And they protect themselves by making sure that it doesn't drop below that 25% level, because they can make you put in additional cash or start selling stuff to cover.
And those interest charges, they can change, right? Because I do believe I was reading that they were changing the interest expense on the shorts on.
Yeah, they're variable.
Right. Okay.
Right. So, I mean, the best way to think about it in simple terms is like I said to Bob, if I borrow a cup of sugar, I owe him back a cup of sugar. It's a little simplified because I actually owe him a cup of sugar plus the interest plus any, other costs that came in. But just to visualize it,
it's more like, hey man, if you fill up my tank today, I'll buy you gas next week and a pack of smokes. And
it's kind of the would-be, right? I'm glad we see you on Tuesday for a hamburger today.
Right. And then I try and fill your tank on Thursday when the price is at the lowest point of the week.
Well,
that's
there you
what
go.
I'm hoping that the price of gas goes down. So I just owe you a tank of gas and a pack of smokes for your trouble.
There you go.
Got it.
Well, one of the things that I've always noticed that I've always been fascinated by is that, when you turn on CNBC, and you see these guys, giving advice, they never explain the risk of a short sale, which is unlimited, as you said, plus interest. It's probably, I don't know whether you can comment on this, Jack, so I will. I think it's the most risky thing you can do in the investment arena is selling short.
Well, it'd be up there. There's other strategies that, believe it or not, can actually leverage that into really crazy, which right. is part of this story through the use right. of options and derivatives. So, with that understanding, so what happens to make this GameStop story kind of interesting is GameStop.
And I was going to say, in GameStop, the reason it enters the picture is because everybody believed that this retailer of games, which has moved online, is just going to keep bleeding value, right? Is that kind of what made that stock attractive?
Well, there were a lot of people who thought that. Actually, it's funny. One of the people who didn't think that, Bob, was Michael Burry. And I don't know if you know that name. Not really a household name.
The Big Short.
Kind of became that way through the movie The Big Short with Kristen Bale.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy who was able to capitalize on credit default swaps in the 2008 financial crisis. Mm-hmm. Made quite a name for himself. He actually, somewhere around August of 2019, took a very long position in GameStop because he felt that they had a lot more potential than they were getting credit for. And it's been reported he actually wrote a letter to the board of directors with some, advice and observations on what they should do going forward. So he felt that they were actually undervalued. But a lot of people said, well, it's kind of like the next Blockbuster. And I think that's an important phrase. It's kind of like the next Blockbuster because there's people on either side of the market. Some people want it to go down because they're short. Some people are rooting for it, thinking, hey, at $4, I might be getting a great deal. And there's some people that think short selling is just simply taking advantage of price movement in the stock one way or the other. No different than being long. And there's people who find this actually kind of ethically repulsive because you're kind of rooting against the home team is what they would say. You're rooting for a company that employs people and all that to really go under. So it kind of makes this division of in the press. A lot of people view short sellers as unethical. But it's funny that Warren Buffett himself actually in 2018 said, I don't think short selling is per se evil. I think that it creates liquidity in the markets and it can actually expose fraud. So it's not necessarily always bad, but there are people who find it a little repulsive and they don't like that. So what happens, the reason I said the Blockbuster thing, is there was an article published on Motley Fool in December of 2019, and the headline was, is GameStop the next Blockbuster? And that kind of became a narrative. And then in December of 2020, a website called Bullish Ripper actually came out with a headline that asked, is GameStop the next Blockbuster? So this was kind of the narrative going on. And there's a lot of hedge funds. The one that's really been talked about in the news is this Melvin Capital, because they took a short position that was a lot larger than the average person, or firm. So they were short the stock, waiting for it to go down, become the next blockbuster. And you have Michael Burry, who's pretty long in it. He thinks there's a future there potentially. So with that, there's this gentleman who's, I think he's like 39 now, but back in 2012, Jamie Roginski started this thread on Reddit. Reddit is a discussion board, social media format, and he started a sub-thread called Wall Street Bets. And he said on NPR just recently that the reason he did that is he was looking for a forum where people could talk about high-risk security transactions and high risk, high reward. Couldn't find it, so he figured he'd start one. It actually got a lot of members. When this whole thing started, I think there were around 4 million members on Reddit. And one of those members, who's become quite notorious in the news, or famous, is a gentleman who had a YouTube channel where he gave some stock picks under the name of Roaring Kitty. And he had a Reddit name that was actually Deep Effing Value. And he was following this, and he apparently took what amounted to, pretty much his life savings. It's what he said, of about $53,000, and put it into GameStop, kind of following on Michael Burry. And he identified, because when there's stock available in the marketplace, they do publish how many shares are being held long term and how many are being shorted. And there's those research firms that do that. What you can find it on places like MarketBeat. And Citron was a huge firm that put out short research. And he really identified that there were more shares shorted, at about 140% more short than even existed. So if you think back to what I was saying, that as the stock prices move,
slow down for a second. How is that possible? How can you borrow more than actually is in the marketplace?
Well, because there are products like when Mike said, well, I think a short might be one of the most risky. I had said, well, a little foreshadowing. The way to make it more risky is through the use of leverage in derivatives. So you can actually go short on options and futures and other things that actually magnify the amount, so that there was 140% short of what was actually available. And Mike, you said you like economics. So, one of the basic tenets of the first thing is scarcity, right? Unlimited wants, limited means. These firms, everybody short needs to cover. They need to buy. I mean, every short seller is tomorrow's buyer. At some point, they have to cover. And the problem is there weren't even enough shares in the marketplace at that time to cover all of the shorts. So this gentleman, his name's actually Keith Patrick Gill, but he identified this kind of disconnect in the market and took a long position, and then started really talking about this through social media to really build this huge fan base to say, hey, guys, let's go out and start buying it. Even if you can only afford 1 share or 10 shares or 100 shares, just buy it, because we're going to create the squeeze. Now, the squeeze happens because every time the stock gets purchased, it forces the price up a little bit. And every time it gets sold, it goes down a little bit. So this tremendous buying volume from largely millennial investors, these Reddit members of the thread, was really just the ignition to the fire, because they moved the price enough that it forced short sellers to start to have to buy stock in order to cover their position. Their buying drives the price up. So that makes the next person who's short, either through regulation have to buy the stock. Or hedge funds, it's generally they are accountable to shareholders, so they're not going to let a loss go too bad. So they start covering, closing, buying, and it just becomes this frenzy. And that's how the stock got driven up at its peak, 1,700%. So they
great sound effect for that. That was beautiful. Was that planned? I'm supposed to be on sound effects, and it was very dramatic. It was very good. I don't know who made the noise.
Not me.
It was Jack.
Yeah,
I didn't think it made a noise, but so what happened ultimately? The interesting part of the story is this Keith Patrick Gill. The news has said, "Oh, it's really a David versus the Goliath." I think it's really more different Goliaths against Goliaths, because it turns out he actually is in the financial services industry. That he has a certification of certified financial analyst that's come out in the news, which is not a light credential. It's 3 years of study. It takes 3 different levels to get there. So, arguably a pretty bright guy. And he identified this and really mobilized an army to start the buying, which ignited the fire. So the part of the story is this $53,000 was estimated to be worth close to $50 million by the middle of last week.
Wow. That's incredible.
And my camera's broken.
Bob?
And that Melvin Capital came out and they did close their short position last week, and it's estimated they took over a $3 billion loss. Wow. That fund is down 53% for the year at the end of January. It had about $12.5 billion of assets going into the year, finished January with around $8. So you can imagine they took about a $3.5 billion loss due to this really online mobilization of people trying to find this vulnerability or opportunity and really doing their best to exploit it. I guess on Reddit, the terminology is they talk about having diamond hands versus paper hands. And if you have diamond hands, it means you will hold that stock, whether it goes up, whether it goes down, until you achieve the objective. Paper hands people sell it too quickly. So what's interesting is these firms need to buy these shares, and now everyone's holding them and they refuse to sell. And that's what just drove the price up to try to turn those diamond hands into paper hands. And, the follow-up to that story is it peaked out well over $500 a share last week. Today it closed at 90. Wow. So it seems to have come down just as fast as it went up.
Yeah.
Once the squeeze is over. But in the meantime, they did tremendous created financial losses, of course, for the hedge funds.
So, Jack, any word on these guys that had the long position that created the short squeeze? Because I was reading some things where they were talking about hold your shares, hold your shares, hold your shares. And I realized that it down just now today at 90. I'm curious to see how these guys are faring that have ridden it all the way up. Did they hold on to it as it goes back down? How many of these guys that were making, I think you said, 50,000 made 53 million? I mean, were those the numbers that you used?
Yeah, it was 53,000. It ended up being approximately 49.7 million.
All right. And I'm just curious if that guy held.
What's funny about that? I was wondering that too. And what I could find online is that he did regularly post screenshots of his account value on Reddit.
Right.
And the last that I could see, he had a screenshot that did show 13 million of cash in addition to that. So at some point, it would appear those diamond hands did become paper hands. It's just a matter of how many other people. Look, it really created a thing where Reddit went from 4 million users to just in the last week, they're now over 7 million. Robinhood, the online brokerage, which is the online brokerage of choice for small and modest positions, they had over 600,000 downloads in one night. So it seems like there's more people joining the movement, and it would be a kind of a done deal. Say, hey, they found this isolated opportunity. He mobilized people online. But the reason I think the story isn't finished and it remains kind of interesting is that was just the beginning. Arguably, they have already said publicly that they're going to have additional targets in the future. There's where you saw that with AMC, Bed Bath & Beyond, BlackBerry.
I noticed
and then
just
one day they
couple
tried
days.
a silver squeeze.
Yeah.
That seems kind of lofty to me, because when you go into a commodity, you don't have that scarcity. There's only so many GameStop shares.
Right.
You can mine more silver. So, I didn't get a lot of traction there. And so far today, it seemed kind of like things are kind of calm. But it has totally changed. I think it's going to totally change the way the market moves in the future, because stock analysts who give like a buy, hold, sell recommendation on the stock are largely looking at fundamentals. They're saying, oh, what's the price earnings ratio? What's income? What's EBITDA? What is price to book ratio? Now it's like you almost have to go out and see what's the chatter on the social media. Is this a target potentially? And I started to allude to there's a company called Citron who has made a lot of, their business has been for 20 years publishing research on short companies, and they announced that they're at least suspending operations because they don't want to be what's fueling the next short squeeze.
All right. Well, Jack, I've got time for maybe one more question here, and then I'm going to try to obligate you to come back next week and update us. Do you have time to do that, to come back again and keep us kind of informed with this? I mean, I know I'm just catching you right on air. If the answer is no,
that would be great, because it like I said, we don't know how effective it will be going forward. It was certainly disruptive in the last week to the markets. And it'll be interesting to see if that momentum stays and if this becomes kind of a new normal.
Right. I would love to have you come back to give your expertise on this. Here's one last question for you. Comes from Aaron Campbell. What do you think of the illegal market manipulation claims over Robinhood?
Okay. Well, I think Robinhood at one point last week, with the 600,000 downloads and the huge volume and buying, suspended purchases in certain stocks, one of them being GameStop, AMC. I think there was a list of, it was several at first. They backed down from that. And there's been a lot of criticism saying, oh man, they're just trying to defend the Wall Street, protect the institutional investors by stepping on the little guy and not letting him participate. And I think that, people like AOC have come out and Ted Cruz too, so it's on both sides, have said, oh, we need to have a hearing over this. And I guess my opinion on that is we'll take a wait and see attitude. But I do know that, just like as I described with a retail investor, there are certain capital requirements to maintain. There are for firms as well. And there's been a lot of reports that Robinhood suspended trading, and they had to tap into a $500 million credit line. And then about 24 hours later, they were able to raise an additional $1 billion of capital from their investors, because they have to have capital requirements, meaning they have to have certain levels of liquidity to what stocks are in inventory. And I don't know, Robinhood is kind of a platform. My understanding is it's kind of built on giving access to individual investors. They don't really cater to institutions. So I would tend to think it probably was more regulatorily driven than some kind of a social statement, because that's their core client is the retail investor.
Well, Jack, Bob, while you were off camera, because we got to get on to our other soap opera with Jarrod Tudor. Bob, while you were off camera, Jack has agreed to come back on and give us an update, because this is an ongoing saga, and you did such a great job kind of laying the groundwork on what's going on, what happens. And I think your expertise is going to be really great as the weeks unfold and as you have time to dedicate to us to come in and give us that insight that you have, because that's just a fascinating story that you shared with us. So
thank you
so
for the opportunity to share it.
And you got another week to come up with another baseline with Bob for our theme song. So Jack,
I've got plenty. There you go.
All right. So Jack, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
We'll see you next week, Jack. Bob, I got to tell you,
there we go.
Great job bringing in Mr. Butler.
I told you he was a winner.
He is phenomenal.
Yes.
And a wonderful job. And
I can already feel his fan base growing as the show went on. So you'll have somebody else to compete with.
So we're going to I can't. So he's going to come back on next week. Yeah. And by the way, Bob, I just want to tell everybody right now, we got Dr. Matt Bertone coming back on next week as well. You remember Matt? Dr. Matt Bertone?
Dr. Matt Bertone, the bug guy. Yeah.
The bug guy is coming back. So we're going to have Jack and the Bugs.
See, and then I have dual fanship with Mrs. Butler.
Yes.
So that's already one in the bag for me.
So let's get on to our next dramatic event. Let's bring on Dr. Tudor, who has his own fan base. And he's going to talk to us about what's going on in Washington, D.C. Jarrod, how are you this evening?
Good. How's it going, guys?
It's going well. Good to see you.
Very good. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Hey, I want to ask Jack the first question for next week. He did a great job of explaining what happened, and it kind of gets scary. I wonder, there he is. He can answer it now too if he wants. But you'd mentioned the margin calls, and you'd mentioned how risky this can be. How that this is democratization and little guys getting involved. And my fear is that you get a lot of these people that don't know what they're doing, that wouldn't understand margin calls. And you can reduce your risk through options and things of that nature. The question is, do you think that this will scare Congress enough to the point where you're going to need more regulation? Or let's say you're testifying in front of a House panel or a Senate panel, would you say, hey, don't worry about it. There are plenty of financial advisors and experts to help these people through? Well, how would you respond to that?
Well, I like I said, there's kind of there's two sides on that, and short selling definitely. I believe that there are legitimate uses for it, other than just
absolutely
looking down a company through hedging and other investment strategies that would be maybe seen as more legitimate. But I think what happens, to answer your question, with financial advisors, I think we have a very different role, because now, particularly with something called regulation best interest, we have a fiduciary standard. So we can't just say to a client, oh, you should engage in leverage or go short, right? We have a fiduciary standard to make sure that advice would be good. The other side of that, though, is if you're going onto Robinhood, you're kind of controlling your own destiny. You're not accepting advice, and there's no duty. They have no duty to you at all. They're basically providing you with the means to either prosper or self-destruct your family's financial future. And there's really no duty there at all. So they did change some of the margin requirements and the amounts on credit default swaps. So you might see something like that.
Okay. And Jack, something that you said to me when we were talking on the phone, one of the positives from all this is that, and correct me if I'm wrong as far as the percentages, but you were saying that there are 47% of the population is not in the stock market. They're not investing, and they're not taking advantage of the benefits or getting involved in the risk of it. And that something like this that brings more people into that can only be a good thing in a way. Did I kind of hear you right in that sense?
Well, I without getting into whether it's a positive or negative in this absolute way that they're doing it, I think anytime that you have people asking about the stock market, considering the stock market, participating in the stock market, I think that would be a positive.
All right. Well, excellent. Jarrod, any more questions for Jack before we?
No, but thanks for answering that question, Jack. I mean, that's the stuff that you've already seen, as you'd mentioned, all these calls on Capitol Hill already for, we got to make sure this doesn't happen again, or we've got to warn people. I'm not so sure it's necessarily warranted, but it's interesting stuff.
All right, Jack, we'll see you next week. Thank you. But you can hang out in what they call the green room in here if you want to.
Thank you.
All right. So, what is Mike doing?
That's a good question.
Yeah. No. There we go.
Bob, I can always count on you. Always count on you.
Oops.
No, it's no oops. It's just right. I can always count on you. I got to step away for 2 seconds, and there it is. You're like a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we're all here now. Jarrod, welcome back to the show. So, what's on the agenda for you tonight?
Well, I thought maybe we talk about what's cooking in D.C. and maybe start with President Biden's first couple of weeks. And, for the most part, he's off to a pretty good start. He's probably got a cramped hand. He signed 45 executive orders overturning things that the Trump administration had done. And that's a record. Very rarely do you see somebody that's that anti the predecessor to go and basically spend a lot of time at his desk. And of course, a lot of these executive orders had already been typed out. They had already been communicated. Everybody knew what was going to happen. But again, on that first day, over 10 executive orders trying to undo things that we had seen during the previous 4 years.
And I seem to remember that seems to the past, say, 4 presidencies, that number continued to go up, where it wasn't such a. I know that Donald Trump signed a lot of executive orders in his first week as well, and President Obama did the same thing after George W. Bush. Is this just kind of something we're going to see in politics, where the use of the executive order is going to be the first bold stroke of setting the agenda for that particular president?
I don't know. It's a really good question. Again, executive orders are generally used when you have gridlock in Congress. So that is to say, if you can't get legislation through, then what you do is you go down to the next step in law, and that is the executive order. It has the same rank as an administrative rule. Imagine the EPA or SEC passing legislation, kind of like what Jack was talking about earlier, those kinds of things. And what you're doing is you're really changing interpretations of existing statutes. So you think of a large statute, it's got lots of stuff in it. Generally, you pass it off to an agency that's going to interpret law, right? And all these interpretations come in the forms of rules and regulations or directives from the president, which are executive orders. But he was indeed very busy. Probably the two that would be at the top of the list, of course, is re-entering the Paris Climate Accord, something that he had telegraphed for quite some time while running for office. And then also, I'd say just put it in one big package, several executive orders on immigration, all right, such as not separating families, such as removing the payback rule, whereby if immigrants come into the United States and use public services, they would be accountable for those, just like getting a bill, all right, unlike what we would do with regular Americans that would use government services. And then maybe a close third would be the Buy American rule, which again just deals with procurement. I don't think it's really going to do a whole lot. The rules on procurement, whether a particular product such as this, wonderful I didn't know that mug, is it really 50% made in the United States or not? That's still really going to be pretty difficult. But he was certainly very busy.
And sorry, Mike.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say, Bob, you made a couple of comments about the number of executive orders. I got to say, if he's able to if any president, let's just not make, I don't want to make this political Democrat, Republican or anything, but
Right.
if they're acting within their abilities, what does it matter how many executive orders are signed?
Right.
Well, it generally doesn't legally. Okay.
Right.
And of course, you're giving agencies new rules to follow, how they execute their business, how they follow the statutes that gave them the authority to do whatever it is that they do. So imagine any agency you would want. Okay. But with that said, it's generally kind of a poke at the other party saying, you know what, I'm not sure I trust you enough to work together. However, again, President Biden had a pretty good start. So let's say you put aside the impeachment process that's going on. You put away the investigation concerning the Capitol Hill riot. Okay. He had 10 Republican senators come over and say, hey, let's sit down and talk. That's a pretty good start. Now, again, these were the 10 who I would certainly consider the most centrist. I would argue that probably 4 of them will probably vote to convict Trump. I'm not necessarily saying that that's a measure of whether you're a centrist or not, but it's a pretty good start. And again, when it comes to the COVID package, right, what was President-elect Biden when he announced it. Now President Biden said, I'm going to sink another $1.9 trillion into the economy to get us through this COVID pandemic. That's going to go up against the roughly $600 billion package the Republicans are pushing. And they sat down and they talked about it. Now, the next step, and kind of getting back to Bob's question in terms of, and Mike's question rather, regarding the use of executive orders and does it really matter? Well, think about how the $1.9 trillion package might move through Congress. Will it move through a traditional legislative process, or is it going to go through budget reconciliation? Now, if it goes through budget reconciliation, all the Democrats need is their group of 50. Vice President Kamala Harris comes in, becomes 51, and then you're done, right? Now, if you're going to go through a traditional statutory process, well, then you have to worry about unlimited debate, a filibuster, and then getting to 60 to invoke cloture to end the filibuster, all right? And that's going to be very, very difficult to do. I think the Republicans are posturing a little bit. This is a test of bipartisanship, but I think it's one that's healthy. I don't think there's anything wrong with what the Republicans are. I think it's very healthy. Again, these were the centrists, but we'll see what happens. My guess is, again, the Republicans making the argument this is too much money. The Democrats making the argument that we don't have a choice but to sink another $2 trillion in the economy. And everybody who's looking at this objectively saying, you know what, you're probably both right. It is too much money, but you don't really have a choice. The $1.9 trillion is going to go through. There's no doubt about it. And so it's probably going to be budget reconciliation, but at least it's a good start.
And speak to this for a minute. Going back to the executive orders, it's not a replacement for the job of Congress, and there are certain limits that the executive order is. Where are those limits? What can and can, I mean, it's probably a long answer, but what can and cannot an executive order do?
I'll make it as short as I possibly can. Obviously, we've had many conflicts whereby one party says, here's an administrative order, right? And it goes against the intent of Congress, right? And the executive branch saying, no, I'm well within my confines of the particular federal statute. So if you think about it in terms of the hierarchy of law, a statute, right, is above an administrative order or executive order. And if a party were to challenge it, say somebody is adversely affected by it, right, which can also be another part of government, all right, they can challenge it in court. So, Bob, unfortunately, the answer to your question, right, rests on how a court believes congressional intent is being carried out as the president fills out that executive order. If that sounds complex, well, that's what the framers wanted. They wanted none of this to be easy, right? And it's not. So the answer is often it depends on what the person in the black robe on the bench that day thinks the limits are going to be.
Follow up, Bob?
Oh no, that answered it for me. Thanks. I thought you had a follow up. I'm sorry.
I was just going to sit here and watch you. You look very inquisitive.
Tudor, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great show. No, I don't.
Bob, you looked all inquisitive. I saw a question in your eyes, so I was sitting here just letting you question. So.
No, it's probably something about breakfast tomorrow that was as far as what's going to happen for breakfast tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Well, where are we on the impeachment process? What's going on there?
Well, it's gotten a little convoluted. So essentially, Trump is trying to find people to represent him in the Senate trial. So again, as we'd already talked about a couple different times on our show, it is the responsibility of the House to impeach. The House has done that. They've moved the bill of impeachment over to the Senate. The Senate is now trying to organize the trial. President Trump, as anybody who is being impeached, has a right to a defense. This is an unusual process. It's both legal as well as political. Remember that the only two remedies through impeachment is, number one, removal from office. Now, again, that's not a remedy right now because President Trump is no longer president. But number two, since this bill deals with insurrection, if he's found responsible for the insurrection, then it can be a bar to federal office. Okay. Now, that's where things are going to get probably legally wishy-washy. The Republicans and whoever's defending President Trump are going to make the argument that his speech is protected by the First Amendment. I think that's a fairly good argument in the sense that's the best one you can make. I'm not sure it will prevail. Rather, it would prevail in a court of law. Now, again, you still have to get to 67 senators to convict, and I just don't think that's going to happen. I can't find. In fact, we can go back to the list. I think things have changed a little bit, and I just don't see 67. But nonetheless, President Trump has had a couple of legal teams actually back away and say, yeah, we're not doing this. Now, it looks like he's secured some representation. It's not going to be the heavy hitters like you saw Jay Sekulow and some of the others about a year ago. This is going to be not nearly the same quality group, or at least the same group in terms of public awareness.
So moving along here, what about you've mentioned some things about Senator Rob Portman. So what's going on with him?
Yeah, so Rob Portman has decided to hang it up here in Ohio. Rob Portman has a long career in politics. He was a member of the U.S. House from the southwest part of the state. Was also the Office of Management and Budget director, has also been the U.S. Trade Representative, has, of course, now a U.S. Senator from the state of Ohio. He has decided to resign. Now, that would lead me to believe, and I think everybody else that does this for a living, to believe that he may be a yes to convict vote, saying, you know what, I don't have to worry about it in 2022. I don't have to worry about a primary. I don't have to worry about running for office. I may just convict President Trump a trial and go home and not have to worry about any kind of backlash. Now, he is, in the interviews over the last week, he's kind of pulled back a little bit from saying, yes, this is a horrible thing that President Trump did. Yes, he did incite a riot. Yes, he did push people to go to the Capitol and storm the building. I would put him as probably one of a group of, say, 7 that would possibly vote. I think you got 5 for sure, and then 2 possibly. So there might be maybe a better than 50% chance that you get 7. I've got a list of maybe 11 where you'd need 10 of that group, and I think it's impossible. I mean, I just came up with the 10 that are most, the 11 you need 10 of this 11 that would most likely vote that way. Although, again, I think it's less than a 20% chance.
So you've kind of slid into, in my opinion, you said of something that is really interesting, which is we're positioning for 2022 already, and the impact of this. So what is that, what's at stake for the election, and what's at stake in terms of moving forward on the impeachment process?
Yeah, and they're entwined. So, Mike, that's a really good question. We're already in campaign season. Okay, so you think about Kevin McCarthy, who went to Florida to talk to President Trump, see if they can pull something together. Kevin McCarthy, of course, wants the House back, right? He would like to be Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, all right? So essentially, he needs to find a way to get 7 seats, all right? And he may be doing the calculus. And again, on our show, we talked several times about internal polling. It may be that the Republicans believe the best way to get to taking back the House is by hooking their wagon to President Trump. Now, the Republican Party is going to have to decide what the face of their party is going to be over the next 2 years. I don't think they have to worry about it for the presidential election of 4 years. I think that's still too far out, and we all have very, very short memories. But 2 years is a short enough period of time where I think we need to focus on it. I mean, right now, if you look at the face of the Republican Party, it's probably President Trump. It probably has a little bit to do with the rioters on Capitol Hill. And right now, the person that's taking all of the headlines is Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I think the Republicans are going to have to find a way to manage that. And I'm not saying there's a right way and there's a wrong way, but what they're going to focus on is how they can get the House back. And if they think hitching their wagon to President Trump, right, will get them the 7 seats. Now, remember, this is the House of Representatives, right? All states draw their districts differently. Most states allow for some what I would call pretty significant political gerrymandering, so they can draw districts to get it. And if they do the calculus, again, they picked up seats in this last election. We often forget about that. They only need 7 seats, right? Now, actually, we have 3 vacant seats, so I'm making it as hard as I possibly could for the Republicans and say they got to reach 7, all right? In a few months, we may be down to 4, and that's all they need. All right. So it's going to be a pretty interesting season, but the Republicans have got to decide who the face of their party is. The Democrats have it pretty easy. It's going to be President Biden. That's easy. It's probably going to be Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. But there's no decision making. There's no, well, what is it we're going to do next? There's no calculus, that type of thing. But the Republicans are really going to have to take a long, hard look to see how they can get the House. And again, remember, the Senate is still 50-50. Now, by looking at the makeup of the Senate and who's up for election in 2022, I don't see the Republicans winning the Senate. Still 2 years out. But again, you see a couple of people saying, I'm not doing this again. All right. Yep. And Rob Portman, Pat Toomey, some others in what we call purple states, swing states, is going to make it very, very tough. But the House is certainly in play.
So you got 1 minute to answer 2 questions.
You got it.
Okay. I want to know about Trump's fundraising. How's that going going now and moving forward, and talk about the corporate PACs and where they're at with their contribution.
Yeah, they're certainly related, and it's a great question because, again, campaign finance is everything. All right. Again, nobody's going door to door. Yeah, some people are going door to door, but nobody's really going door to door to run for office, right? These things cost money. And we've seen look what we saw in Georgia, how much money was sunk in just the 2 short-term Senate races, right? Basically just 2-month runs, okay? Trump has raised almost $250 million, right, since his election. All right. And I should say since the election, right? He didn't win, obviously, but he's raised that kind of money. All right. Now, again, he's not going to get that money and hasn't been getting that money from PACs, right? Corporate bodies, all right, or labor bodies. Labor's never going to side with the Republicans right now, I don't think. But think about this. These are individual contributions that he's getting. Now, the individual contribution is good in the sense if you're raising money, it's money. But it's also a measuring stick, and this is where the Democrats can't ignore it, of support. If you're getting contributions at that level that are just mere cash, that shows you, one, how close this last election was. Remember, we've already said it was really down to 44,000 people. You change their minds, President Trump gets another 4 years, right? But now he's getting this kind of individual support where the corporations are saying, oh, now we're just going to take a look at this and back way off. So corporate contributions have not quite dried up completely, but they are these, political directors, every PAC has one. Every firm has one, vice president of government relations or whatever it is their title is. And they're saying, we're holding off until we see how this shakes out. Right. Again, I think it'll be another bigger challenge for the Republican Party in 2022.
Right. Jarrod, thank you. As always, excellent information. And, you'll be coming back on hopefully again here real soon to keep us updated on what's happening in Washington. And again, I got to give you a lot of credit for your reporting because I can't tell. Are you Democrat? Are you Republican? Are you Libertarian? Are you whatever branch of political leanings there are? And I just love your reporting because it's just straight to the facts. Unlike Bob, who's got all kinds of leftist comments. So
his tie is blue, but it's not a deep blue. But there is a red thing in the background too. So I don't know.
Like I said,
can't figure it out.
Like
I'll
I
keep
said,
you guys guessing.
Yeah, Jarrod. So, well, I'm not guessing because I know where you stand. when we get into some of our rows off the air. So, Jarrod, thank you again. Excellent information. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and we're going to see you again here real soon.
You're welcome, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Have a good night, Jarrod. Well, we should probably say hi to the professor just because.
I was just gonna do that. I mean, I was just gonna say, the
underutilized portion of the program right there, and you know what, Jarrod. So that way your time hasn't been completely wasted. Give us a wine recommendation for this week.
First, turn your sound on.
First, you got to turn your sound on.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
All right.
There we go.
So it's going to be cold, so definitely red. So let's go with red. Let's go with a big, juicy, jammy, dry red like a Zinfandel.
Okay.
Traditional California Zinfandel or a Petite Syrah. That's going to be my recommendation. High in alcohol.
Right.
Just up Bob's alley.
Oh, you like that, Bob?
Sure, right up Bob's alley, the high in alcohol. The higher in the alcohol, the better.
15%. We can do it.
All right. And what should we put in the crock pot to go with that?
Ooh, well, some kind of
crock pot.
It doesn't have to be the crock pot. Ribs go great with that. It's not really rib season, but if you can swing, that'd be great. So, yeah, ribs and Zinfandel or Petite Syrah go really nice together.
And, you can do, obviously, unless you're, feel like you have an electric smoker and you can go out and do that. But there are ways to do ribs really well without smoke and with, different types of rubs and different types of vapors that you can run through it in the tray. So there's a lot of different things you can do with ribs in the wintertime that are just as enjoyable as the smoke variety without all that smoke.
I got to say something, Bob. We sit here and do an hour of a show. Mm-hmm. We have Jarrod Gray come on, the wine professor, and talk for 3 minutes, and the chat board just starts lighting up with comments about,
how about
wine. So
yeah.
And by the way, we're working on some really fun stuff with Jarrod. Not that he hasn't been absolutely fantastic in previous episodes, but Jarrod has got some really fun things cooking or pouring
in
or
out of a crock pot.
Right, in or out of a crock pot. Yeah, Bob's all about the crock pot. Yes. So thanks, Jarrod.
It has its use. I'm more about my cast iron skillet than I am my crock pot, but crock pot has some definite uses.
Yeah,
for sure.
I can't keep up with the comments. I just can't even flash them up fast enough. So, love everybody doing that. Renee Davis, Kim McBride, Bobby Pickens. Great conversation on wine. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jarrod, because we have wanted to show off Jarrod tonight with his new rig. He's got new microphone and headphones. And
sounds good.
And he sounded really good tonight. So thank you, Jarrod.
I just had some difficulties there, but I came back on.
And no Elizabeth of York.
No, you pissed her off last week. You didn't say anything about her. So she decided she wasn't going to come.
Bob had me all sidetracked with the guitar playing. So I just couldn't believe
Well,
it.
no guitar
It's
playing
my
this week.
birthday. What'd you say? I love the opening line. It's my birthday show. We're going to talk astrology. It's
Yeah,
happy birthday to me. We're going to talk astrology. I love that. So fantastic. So thank you, everybody,
That's
for
great.
tuning in.
I forgot because I made it up on the spot.
Thanks to Jack Butler for his expertise on what's going on in the stock market. To Jarrod Tudor for his expertise. Bob, why am I saying all this? This is your job.
Well, that's why I gave you the music.
Give me the hook, not the music.
Give you the hook, not the music. So, yeah, because that's all the stuff I was going to say. I'm the one that's supposed to be thanking the professor, thanking Jarrod Tudor, and thanking Jack Butler, who will be back next week as we dive deeper into the GameStop saga as we learn and understand shorts. So thank you, everybody, for contributing. Again, thanks to Deirdre Starinki. Did I do that right, Mike?
Yes, you did it.
For all the graphics and support. And we'll be back here. Oh, there he is. And, of course, thank you to Mark Seibert, who's not here, but we'll be back maybe in a couple of weeks. But anyway, we'll be back next week, next Tuesday, 8 p.m. for another edition of I Didn't Know That. Good night, everybody.